I'm going to be going through a latex exercise with you today. I wanted to show you the tools that I've got together. I have some latex, I have an Everlasting Brows ruler. A ruler isn't essential, but it can help you even when you are drawing on latex. I always try and get my brows nice and balanced even when I'm practicing. That skill then translates over when you're working on the skin with your client. So I like to use one of those. I've got some pigment. This is Belinda. You can also use acrylic paints. You can use cheaper pigments for practicing and save more expensive ones for on the skin, but I particularly like these. I have some 0.1812 microblades, and I've also got a disposable microblading tool here. I will continue to use this one because it is for practice, but the nice thing about these is that they are sterile and fully disposable if you were using them on your client. I've got a ruler and I've got a pigment ring. In addition to that, I've also got some cotton rounds for wiping away. And I've got some Vaseline or some cooking oil, which will help me clean that pigment really nicely off of my latex as I work so that I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to start doing the pre-draw on the paper and we'll come back when I've done that. So we now have our pre-draw on our latex. I've tried to clear away some of the lines on there. I use the string measuring method, which I find super easy. For me, a lot of, especially beginners, can get confused with all the lines, and it can seem a bit bewildering if you're not used to it, but it is a bit of a fail-safe method for getting nice, equal, balanced brows. Now when I'm working on latex, I often turn it around, and this is because when I'm working on my client, this is the orientation that I'm working from. I'm working from behind my client. I tend to start on the client's right hand brow and move on to the left, and I like to do the fronts kind of at the same time so that I can make sure that they are the same. Now, again, I know that beginners particularly can struggle with making those fronts look similar, and there isn't any reason that you can't draw in on your client's skin some guidelines to help you. So that's what we're going to do at the moment. I'm going to draw in, just using the pencil, my angles on the right hand side. And you don't have to follow these directly, but it just gives you an idea of where you want to work. And again, I've put a little kind of marker on there where I actually want the brow to start transitioning from the upward strokes to the strokes that go along the back of the brow. So this is just a guide, and it just means that I get a nice flow. My transitions happening in roughly the same place. What I can also do is I can mark on the latex kind of where the spine, the centre part of the brow is where I want that to be. And again, you can do this on your client. Just kind of down the middle here, and again on the other side. I hope you can all see that coming through on the camera. Then it doesn't need to be precise, but it gives us something to work with. So I'm going to get my tool and my pigment ready. I like working with the slant or the flat blades. I also don't mind working with a U-blade. I tend to reserve a U-blade for much more younger, resilient skin, where depth definitely isn't going to be an issue. And for retouches where I need to get into small areas to look at or repair smaller strokes. So just when I'm working on latex, I work in the same way as when I work on the skin. I don't want too much pigment on my needle. Let's see if I can find the camera to show you. So just really a very small amount of pigment, especially when you're working in the skin and there might be hair in the way. If you use too much pigment, the hair's going to get full of pigment. You're not going to be able to see where you're going. So on the skin, I would stretch, 3-point stretch, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to place my hands in a similar position working on the latex. I'm going to place my blade perpendicular to my latex, and I'm going to twist and create that first stroke. I'm actually going to do what I would do on a client, which is to then come over and create a stroke to mirror that on the other side. So I'm going to mirror my strokes. On each side. And these ones at the front are a little bit like sisters. You have a big sister and a little sister. The big sister touches the bottom line, but it doesn't touch the top. And the little sister doesn't touch the bottom line, but it does touch the top. And then you get this kind of layered effect. So I'm going to do a couple of groups of those. Relatively close together. But we don't want them touching, we don't want them crossing. So that's how I would start actually on the skin. At that point, if I was working on the skin, I would then just carry on and complete this side. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a few more of these sister strokes. And they're starting now to lean over towards my transition point, which I marked just here. And at that point, I'm then going to work along the bottom and towards the tail. So I'm going to fill in. These strokes all kind of look the same, but they're now going to be reaching up towards that middle marker line that I made. Don't want them going any further into the brow than that middle spine point. Working nice and slowly along, all the way underneath the belly of that brow, working towards the line. And when we get to this part, when we're over the belly of the arch, we want to think about all of our strokes pointing in the direction of the tail here. So if you see, these are all kind of lining up, all looking towards the tail. That's where we want them to work. Again, kind of kissing each other at the end. And certainly not crossing. Okay, so those are the bottom strokes. I'm then going to go on and do my top strokes. So we have this transition here. I want my top stroke just to come slightly overlapping this one so we don't get this kind of hump or bump. And these strokes run along your top line, and then in a shallow fashion they come into the body of the brow. So we're going to run along that top line and into the body of the brow. Going to run along that top line as we get to the arch. We're going to carry on following that line down and down and down. And again, on these top strokes, we want to leave this middle part clear. We don't want these top strokes coming in too far towards the spine. We want to leave some nice room in the middle so that we've got room to fill. So I'm just going to check before I wipe this away, I'll put any of my numbing on. I want to check that I've hit the bottom of my pre-draw and the top of my pre-draw all the way along. And that way I can ensure that when I come back, whether it's on latex or on the skin, that I've saved my shape. So I don't need to worry about using permanent markers or violet that doesn't come off the skin or anything like that. So in theory, this would be my numbing. Rub a little bit of numbing into my brow, and then come over and work on the other side. Now, this bit here on my actual client, I like to work from the front. I just find I get a cleaner stroke if I then come around and lean over the side of my client slightly. So I've turned my latex around. And I'm going to carry on with those sister strokes, working towards that transition point that I marked again. Like so. And then I tend to come and work from the back again. So don't be afraid of moving around your client as you work. You can do that. They have heads that turn. If you need to be able to put their brow into a different position which makes it easier for you, then that's what you need to do. Again, I'm going to work on these bottom strokes, coming up towards that spine mark that I've made, which is just a guide. And these strokes are all starting to point towards the tail. They're all starting to take a little lean over that side. Finishing off at the bottom. We're now going to do those top strokes. Which again, we're going to follow that top line and down. We're going to run along that top line and down. We don't want to create this bubbly cloud drawing on top. You don't want it to kind of look like this. You want them to follow the line so that they're nice. They're nice and flat, like this along the top. We do that by popping our blade on the line and following it down and along. Following the shape down and along. Again, they're starting to nod towards the tail. We're keeping them nice and shallow and out of the middle so that we've got room to layer our strokes when we come back. Okay, now I probably use a bit too much pigment there. I would have liked to put an extra stroke in, but I can't see what I'm doing there, and I always like to not guess what I'm doing. It's not important really on latex, or not as important, but certainly on your client you want to know that you're working exactly where you want to be. So again, at this point I would cover with some numbing. This is just some Vaseline that I'm using, guys, here. I'm not wasting numbing on my latex. This lady doesn't feel any discomfort, so we don't need to worry about that for her. See if I can get rid of some of this pencil. This is just some coconut oil. Any kind of oil is really good at cleaning off latex, cleaning off pencil. We should be able to see now that we've got this kind of skeleton which marks the outline of my brow. I can now come back and fill in the middle. So this was a part that I always used to really struggle with. I understood where to start and stop my strokes, but then when I ended up with this void in the middle, I didn't really know what to do. And I like to think about my strokes sprouting out from each other. So you can see these two here, and there's a really nice gap in here. So if I put a stroke through there and maybe a stroke on top of it, then I start to layer and build up a really nice natural pattern. And then I can do that as I move along the brow. So again, we're going to have another hair or another stroke sprouting out from there. And then I'm going to use my existing top strokes to layer as I work through. So this would be my second pass on the client. Just want to have a wipe now. I'll be looking for consistency in the strokes that I had before, and if I didn't have consistency there, then I'd be going over them again to make sure there was enough pigment in them. And then I would be covering them with pigment and some numbing, and then looking and working over on the brow on the other side. See if we can get some of that pencil off again. This is a bit of an impromptu demo that I've done here, so excuse the shaky camera work. So here again we have my skeleton, and you can see all of the strokes are touching that very faint pencil line that we've got underneath now. So if I was working in the skin, I wouldn't have lost that shape at all. I still know exactly where I want to be. Really, really simple way of working to make sure that you don't lose your pre-draw. So on this one, I'm going to start with the sprouting out again. Just looking for a little home to put those first kind of adventuring strokes into the middle. A bit too much pigment on there. You know, when you're working on the skin, it's only the very tip of the needle that goes into the skin. So we don't need a lot of pigment on there. And as I mentioned, we won't be able to see what we're doing if we use too much. So So these are sprouting out and through. And then I'm just using those existing top strokes there to be able to layer through my strokes. Give it a little wipe and see where I am. And this is the beauty of following this kind of skeleton pattern, is that if you do get lost wherever at any point and you can't see where you're going because you've used too much pigment or the hair's got in the way, or just something's happened and you can't see exactly what you want to see, you don't have to be afraid of wiping, because your pre-draw is already there, it's already fixed because of the way that we've worked. Okay, so again, if I was working on the skin, I'd come in, I put some numbing and some pigment on. I like to put a bit of pigment on my strokes in between just to help them soak up as much of that colour as possible. And then really this is my last part. This is my checking that we haven't got any big gaps or voids, checking that everything looks nice and pretty, checking that the strokes have got a good amount of pigment in them. This would be, yeah, really my third pass. So I'm just looking over, I'm going to extend this little stroke here. I'm going to extend this stroke and put a new stroke in that little void there. Need to remember, especially with microblading, that the starts and the ends of our strokes are the most vulnerable as they heal. So it's often those parts that we tend to lose. So if you have really big gaps between where one stroke might start and another stroke might finish, when it heals, you might actually have even more of a gap. We can go and put some little baby strokes within if we wanted to. Again, this is going to be my third pass on this side. I always seem to have more gaps when I'm working on this side. This side seems to be more of a strange angle as well, working under the camera. Trying not to get my big old head in the way. Again, just checking for any big gaps, any big voids. Have a good rub in of pigment before we wipe off and see the finished result. So there we are. That's just a very, very quick latex practice for you to do at home. A little recap on the steps that we went through. So first of all, we marked the heads to make sure that they were kind of leaning in a similar way. We put ourselves a guideline along the middle so that we had something to follow there. We made a plan about where our brows were going to start, going from up to down where that transition point is so that they look similar. And then we marked our outline with the strokes. I hope you found that useful. If you did, I've got more training content and tutorials on my website under the training section, which is www.bodyandbrows.com. And that was me, Alice Kingdom. Thank you for watching.